Back when pumpkins weren't just decorations but actual food that fed families through winter, folks knew tricks that today's gardeners have forgotten. They didn't rely on fancy fertilizers or complicated schedules. They used simple wisdom, kitchen scraps, and a deep understanding of how these vines really wanted to grow. Your grandma could coax monster pumpkins from small patches using methods so clever they seem almost like magic. But it wasn't magic. It was knowledge passed down through generations, refined by trial and error, and proven in gardens that had to produce or the family went hungry. Let's dig into 20 ways your grandma grew bigger pumpkins with less work. Planted pumpkins on compost piles. If you've got a compost heap sitting in the corner of your yard, you're looking at the perfect pumpkin bed. Grandma didn't waste time preparing fancy beds for pumpkins. She planted them directly on top of active compost piles where the vines could feast on decomposing kitchen scraps, grass clippings, and garden waste throughout the entire season. The heat from decomposition warmed the roots, giving plants an early start. The rich, loose material provided perfect drainage while holding moisture. As the compost continued to break down beneath the vines, it released a steady stream of nutrients that pumpkins craved. No mixing, no turning, no fancy amendments. Simply drop seeds into the pile in late spring and let nature take care of the rest. By fall, those vines would sprawl across the whole heap, loaded with pumpkins that grew fat on what everyone else threw away. Saved the best seeds. Every autumn, your grandma walked through the pumpkin patch with a critical eye. She wasn't just harvesting, she was selecting next year's genetics. Only the biggest, healthiest, and most perfect pumpkins were saved for seeds. Never the runts or the oddly shaped ones. She'd cut that champion pumpkin open, scoop out the seeds, rinse them clean, and spread them on newspaper to dry for weeks in a warm, dark spot. Those seeds carried the traits of their parent: vigor, size, disease resistance, and productivity. By saving seeds only from winners, she bred stronger pumpkins year after year, perfectly adapted to her soil and climate. It cost nothing but attention, and the results compounded over time. Each generation grew a little bigger, a little tougher, a little more productive than the last. Buried vines at the nodes. Here's a trick that seems almost too simple to work, but it does. Every few feet along a pumpkin vine, you'll find nodes where leaves emerge. Your grandma knew that if you covered those nodes with soil, they'd sprout new roots. More roots meant more water and nutrients, resulting in bigger pumpkins. She'd use a shovel to pile dirt over sections of vine as they stretched across the garden, essentially creating multiple root systems feeding a single plant. This anchored the vines against the wind, too, keeping them from whipping around and snapping. Some folks even used rocks or bricks to weigh down the vines at nodes, encouraging them to root without burying. Either way, those extra roots transformed the plant's capacity to pull resources from the soil, channeling everything into fruit production. Used wood ash in soil. Every time your grandma cleaned out the wood stove or fireplace, she'd save the ashes in a bucket by the back door. Come spring, those ashes went straight into the pumpkin patch. Wood ash is loaded with potassium, the nutrient that drives fruit development and strengthens cell walls. She'd sprinkle a light layer around where the pumpkin vines would grow, then work it into the topsoil with a hoe. Not too much, just enough to give plants that extra boost. The ash also helped deter certain pests and balanced acidic soil. It was free, abundant, and effective. Some folks even mixed ash with compost for an even richer amendment. But the key was moderation. Too much could throw off soil chemistry, so experienced gardeners used a light hand and let the results speak for themselves. Thinned to 1 or 2 fruits per vine. This one goes against every instinct, but it works like magic. When pumpkin vines started setting fruit, your grandma would walk through and pinch off all but 1 or 2 baby pumpkins per plant. It seemed wasteful at first, but the math was simple: 10 small pumpkins or 2 monsters. She wanted monsters. By removing excess fruit early, all the plant's energy flowed into those chosen few. They'd swell to impressive sizes, developing thick walls and rich flesh, perfect for storage. She'd pick the healthiest-looking baby pumpkins closest to the main vine and eliminate the rest without hesitation. Those sacrificed pumpkins fed the winners, and come harvest time, the difference was staggering. While neighbors harvested dozens of small pumpkins, your grandma's 2 per vine would outweigh their entire haul combined. Watered deep, not often. Your grandma didn't baby her pumpkins with daily sprinkling. She watered deeply once or twice a week, forcing roots to dive down searching for moisture. This created tough, resilient plants with root systems that could handle drought and pull nutrients from deep in the soil. Shallow watering produced shallow roots and weak plants. Deep watering produced champions. She'd let the hose run slow at the base of each plant for a good long while, ensuring water penetrated a foot or more into the ground. Then she'd leave them alone for days. This approach saved time, saved water, and built stronger pumpkins. During the hottest weeks of summer, when fruit was swelling fast, she might water a bit more frequently. But even then, it was always deep and thorough, never light and constant. Planted in full sun. This one seems obvious, but it's worth saying, pumpkins need all the sun they can get. Your grandma never planted them in shady areas or those with afternoon shadows. She chose the sunniest, hottest spot in the yard and gave it over entirely to pumpkins. Full sun meant maximum photosynthesis, which translated directly to bigger fruit. Those massive leaves collected solar energy all day, converting it into sugars and starches that were packed into developing pumpkins. Shaded plants might produce, but they'd never match the size and vigor of those grown in blazing sun. She'd orient the planting area so vines could sprawl toward the south, chasing sunlight as they grew. Sometimes she'd even cut back nearby shrubs or move containers that cast shade, refusing to compromise on this one critical requirement. Mulched with straw or leaves. Once pumpkin vines started running, your grandma would cover the soil around them with whatever organic material she had handy. Straw, dried leaves, grass clippings, or even old hay. This mulch layer did multiple jobs at once. It kept soil moist during hot weather, smothered competing weeds, regulated soil temperature, and slowly broke down to feed the soil. Mulch meant less watering, less weeding, and healthier plants. She'd lay it thick, several inches deep, creating a carpet that vines could sprawl across. As the season progressed, she'd sometimes add more mulch to maintain coverage. This simple layer saved hours of work and kept plants thriving even during drought. The decomposing mulch also attracted earthworms, which aerated soil and added their own fertility to the mix. Rotated crops. Your grandma never planted pumpkins in the same spot 2 years running. She knew that doing so invited disease, depleted specific nutrients, and encouraged pest buildup. Crop rotation was law in her garden, non-negotiable. 1 year, pumpkins went in the south bed. Next year, they moved to the east. The year after, maybe the west. This rotation disrupted pest cycles and prevented soil-borne diseases from establishing. It also meant different crops left different nutrients behind. Beans fixed nitrogen, benefiting the pumpkins that followed. Pumpkins used heavy potassium, which didn't bother the lettuce planted after them. This dance kept soil balanced and productive without synthetic inputs. She'd keep mental notes or mark a calendar, never trusting memory alone when it came to rotation schedules. Pinched off late blooms. By midsummer, your grandma stopped letting pumpkin vines set new fruit. She'd walk through and pinch off any flowers that appeared after the main crop was established. This forced plants to put all remaining energy into ripening existing pumpkins rather than starting new ones that would never mature. Late-season flowers drained resources and produced nothing but tiny immature pumpkins that would rot on the vine before frost. By removing them, she redirected that energy into the pumpkins that mattered, making them bigger and helping them ripen fully before cold weather hit. It took just minutes to walk the patch and pinch off blooms, but the impact on final pumpkin size was measurable. Every bit of energy mattered, and she made sure nothing went to waste on fruitless efforts. Fed vines with manure tea. If your grandma kept chickens, rabbits, or knew someone with livestock, she had access to one of the best pumpkin fertilizers ever, manure tea. She'd fill a bucket with fresh manure, add water, let it steep for a few days until it turned dark and smelly, then dilute it and pour it around pumpkin vines. This liquid gold delivered a concentrated hit of nitrogen early in the season, promoting lush vine growth. Later, as pumpkins formed, she'd switch to less frequent feeding to avoid promoting all leaves and no fruit. The tea was free, effective, and perfectly balanced for plants. She'd usually feed every 2 weeks during early growth, then taper off once fruit set. The smell wasn't pleasant, but the results were undeniable. Vines responded with vigorous growth and heavy fruit production. Placed pumpkins on boards or straw. Once pumpkins started sizing up, your grandma would slip a board, a piece of cardboard, or a thick pad of straw underneath each one. This kept them off direct soil contact, preventing rot and discouraging slugs and beetles from chewing into the ripening fruit. It also allowed air to circulate underneath, reducing moisture buildup that could cause soft spots or mold. Some folks used old shingles or flat stones. Others built small platforms from scrap wood. The material didn't matter much. What mattered was getting pumpkins up off wet ground where trouble lived. She'd check periodically and adjust the supports as pumpkins grew, making sure they weren't settling back into the dirt. This simple step could mean the difference between a perfect pumpkin and one ruined by ground rot just before harvest. Grew near corn or beans. Pumpkins weren't always grown in isolation. Your grandma sometimes planted them as part of the traditional Three Sisters method alongside corn and beans. The corn provided a natural trellis for beans to climb, while beans fixed nitrogen in the soil. Pumpkins sprawled at the base, their huge leaves shading out weeds and keeping the soil moist. This companion planting improved soil health and reduced work. Each plant supported the others in a natural partnership that required less intervention than monoculture gardens. The nitrogen from beans fed both corn and pumpkins, while pumpkin vines prevented erosion and conserved moisture that benefited all three crops. It was an ancient system that worked because it mimicked nature's diversity rather than fighting against it. Some years she'd grow pumpkins this way, other years separately. But she always knew the option existed and why it worked. Planted pumpkins after early crops. Your grandma didn't let garden space sit idle. After harvesting early crops like peas, lettuce, or radishes in late spring, she'd plant pumpkins right into that same soil. It was already loose, relatively weed-free, and enriched with leftover nutrients from the previous crop. This succession planting maximized space and productivity without extra effort. Peas had fixed nitrogen in the soil, giving pumpkins a head start. The early crops had already broken up the ground, saving her from heavy digging. She'd just clear the spent plants, add a bit of compost if she had it, and plant pumpkin seeds directly. By the time those seeds sprouted, the soil was ready and waiting. This approach meant getting 2 crops from one bed in a single season, doubling productivity from the same square footage. Kept weeds down early. Your grandma was ruthless about weeds, but only early on. Once pumpkin vines started running and their massive leaves covered the ground, weeds couldn't compete anymore. But in those first few weeks after planting, she'd hoe religiously, keeping the soil clear so baby pumpkin plants didn't have to fight for water and nutrients. She knew that early weed control made all the difference. Let weeds establish, and they'd rob young vines of everything they needed. Keep them down for the first month, and the pumpkins would take over, shading out the competition naturally. She'd hoe shallowly, just scraping the surface to cut off weed seedlings without disturbing pumpkin roots. Once vines covered the ground, her work was done. The plants did the rest, creating their own weed-suppressing canopy. Chose long vines for bigger pumpkins. Old gardeners observed patterns and adjusted accordingly. Your grandma noticed that plants with longer vines tended to produce bigger pumpkins. So, when saving seeds, she'd favor pumpkins from the most vigorous, longest vine plants in the patch. This wasn't just superstition. Longer vines had more leaves, which meant more photosynthesis, resulting in more energy available for fruit production. Over years of selecting seeds from long-vined plants, she bred pumpkins that naturally grew more extensive root and vine systems. These plants could pull more resources from larger areas of soil, supporting bigger fruit. It was a simple observation turned into a breeding strategy, and it worked. Each generation produced slightly more vigorous vines and slightly bigger pumpkins. Turned pumpkins gently. As pumpkins grew, your grandma would occasionally rotate them carefully, just a bit, to ensure even growth and a rounder shape. Pumpkins left in one position all season often developed flat spots where they rested on the ground. Turning them redistributed weight and encouraged symmetrical development. She'd do this gently, supporting the entire pumpkin with both hands to avoid breaking the stem, never yanking or twisting. Just a quarter turn every week or two as they sized up. This also exposed different sides to the sun, which some believed helped them ripen more evenly and develop better color. It was a small touch that took seconds per pumpkin, but resulted in better shaped, more attractive fruit come harvest time. Pruned excess leaves. Once fruit was set and sizing up, your grandma would selectively prune some of the massive pumpkin leaves, especially older ones that were yellowing or blocking airflow. This opened up the vines to more sunlight penetration and better air circulation, reducing disease pressure while directing energy toward fruit rather than foliage. She never went overboard. Leaves were the plant's solar panels after all. But strategic removal of excess or damaged leaves helped the plant focus resources where they mattered most. Better airflow meant less powdery mildew and other fungal problems that could sap plant vigor. More sun reaching the center of the vine meant better fruit development. It was about balance and observation, removing just enough to help without hindering. Watered at the base, not the leaves. Your grandma aimed the water where it belonged, at the roots. She never sprayed water over the leaves or from overhead. Direct watering at the plant's base delivered moisture to the roots without wetting foliage, which reduced the risk of powdery mildew, bacterial diseases, and fungal infections. Wet leaves created perfect conditions for disease. Dry leaves stayed healthy. She'd snake the hose right to the base of each vine, let it run slow and steady, then move to the next plant. On hot afternoons, those massive pumpkin leaves might look wilted, but she knew that was normal. They'd perk up by evening once the sun's intensity faded. She watered in the morning when possible, giving any accidental moisture on leaves time to evaporate before nightfall. Let frost kill the vines. Here's the trick that separates patient gardeners from impatient ones. Your grandma left pumpkins on the vine until frost killed the plant. Even after the leaves blackened and died, she'd let the pumpkins sit in the field for another week or two, allowing them to finish curing in the autumn sun. This final ripening period developed the thick, hard rind that made pumpkins last months in storage. The sugars concentrated, the flesh firmed up, and the stem dried and sealed properly. Harvesting too early meant pumpkins that rotted quickly or didn't taste as good. She knew that patience in those last weeks paid off all winter long. Once the vines were completely dead and the stems had dried hard, she'd harvest on a dry day, cutting the stem several inches from the fruit and handling each pumpkin carefully to avoid bruising. Which of these old-school pumpkin tricks are you going to try this season? Let us know in the comments below. Leave this video a hype, and see you on the next one.